thank you. Thanks, Dan, for your leadership and friendship, and all of my colleagues. You know, I want to hone in a little bit on the environmental and climate advantages of American-made energy. It's been alluded to, but you might notice in our materials we've set some goals. These are aspirational in some respects, but very pragmatic in other respects. We invite others to bring their ideas of how to enhance energy development in the United States in a way that also reduces greenhouse gas emissions and participates in the reduction of global emissions. But what happened in Glasgow that was probably the most disturbing to me was that we have a president who went there and apologized for America's excellence and then provided cover for the biggest polluters in the world. We have an opportunity with our allies and with our technologies, I think, to set a different goal than simply let's get America to zero. Let's unilaterally disarm the American economy by just getting to zero and then let China do what they do. And you realize in recent years, for every ton of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that the United States has reached, China has added 4. We reduce 1, they add 4. That's not much of a global strategy. So I'd rather have us set, for example, a goal, rather than U.S. being 0 by 2050, let's set a goal for the planet to reduce emissions by 40% by 2050. If the planet reduces GHGs by 40% by 2050, we will have done 3.5 times more good than if the United States simply unilaterally disarms our economy. And that doesn't even consider the synergies of American technology. American technology. We are doing things around this country. I mean, look back to Dan's point about the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. But over the decades, we've reduced SOx, NOx, mercury, particulate matter in several of our plants. We've acquiesced much of our leadership in nuclear to our adversaries while we invented it. I think we ought to restore nuclear energy as a high priority, especially with the newer technologies that provide more efficient, smaller plants. And then that technology itself becomes an innovation for sale. But we have to hold our allies and adversaries to a higher standard, not just unilaterally disarm in the United States. So a whole bunch of things. Hydrogen, great opportunity in this country, both green and blue hydrogen. Dan's already talked about natural gas. You realize that according to the Department of Energy's analysis, natural gas produced in the United States of America, liquefied and shipped to Europe, has 41% lower greenhouse gas emissions than Vladimir Putin's natural gas produced in Russia and put through a pipeline when you consider the life cycle of that natural gas. So natural gas is still a big part of it. It's going to be a big part of it going forward. But so are other technologies. And I'll just end it at that and then look forward to some questions. And more importantly, really looking forward to the future when our colleagues bring even more better, greater ideas.
Senator, do you think it's important to commit the nation to holding the rise in global warming to 1.5 degrees?
Let me take a shot at the specific question about the degree, the temperature goal. It's okay to have an aspiration, I suppose, but we don't know what it will take to maintain that. I mean, it might do better than that. But what we can control, or at least aim at, are emission standards, right? Not whether it meets 1.5 degrees or less or more, I don't know, but we ought to do everything we can on the emission side, and that's more measurable. But I think you have to spread that out, and so you don't think it's just all about natural gas, and natural gas is certainly an important fuel, and we do produce it and much cleaner than other parts of the world, and we ought to be selling it to the rest of the world. But in addition to that, let's talk about manufacturing for a little bit. We've lost a lot of manufacturing throughout the last few decades. They all said we could never get it back. Donald Trump brought a lot of it back. But if we brought back more of the supply chain, if you will, the manufacturing of things that we used to manufacture here into the United States, where we do have better standards, where we do have cleaner burning fuels, where we do do it better, that's a significant impact. It's not just about the energy we produce, but it's the other things we produce as well. I might also just have, from a technological standpoint, I talked a little bit about nuclear, and I think John Kennedy probably touched on that pretty well. But nuclear, remember, is not just a fantastic fuel for generating electricity and emissions-free, but it's a really important fuel in deterring war. And when we acquiesce the development of nuclear weapons, for example, or nuclear energy, pretty soon you don't have the intellectual or academic resources as well as the other natural resources. I guess I'd rather rather than just go on and on about some of the other same things, let Cynthia talk a little bit, and then maybe if you have other specific questions, I'd like to dig in.
Other questions?
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, Senator. Ellen Nelson. I cover climate for CNN. I wanted to ask you guys, so is this the first time that a Republican climate energy plan has included these specific greenhouse gas reductions in it?
I can't speak for all Republican plans. It's not. I think to your point, it's unusual. I think there's a growing realization by politicians of all stripes that it's an issue that Americans want us to deal with. You've heard some differences, or at least some views up here from our colleagues. I've always said it's not a either or. You know, you're not either a denier or a worshiper. There are a whole bunch of people in between that understand that the climate's changing, but don't know whose fault it is and how much who's responsible for how much. Doesn't matter. The American people want us to deal with it. They want us to have solutions. And I'm saying, and I think what we're saying is we think American solutions are better than other solutions. And we can take a lead, but it's got to be a lead in the global marketplace. So to answer your question, it's unusual. I don't know that we're making history today, but it's got to be an important part of it. I might add to one of the really important parts of even the Green New Deal. When you talk about things like electric vehicles, you talk about solar panels, there's another whole industry that supplies that is very energy intensive. Rare earth minerals especially. Again, another area where we have as a country acquiesced much of the mining of rare earth minerals and critical minerals that are important to these new technologies to other countries. And these other countries mine it much more recklessly than we do. They use labor standards that would never meet our standards. And yet we have some of those resources here. We can bring some of that back here. We need to bring some of that back here. And again, I think we can lead both in the cleaner mining of it and in the production of future opportunities.
So I was wondering, just why now? And I'm curious, how much buy-in you guys have.
I want to talk a little bit about. There are a number of things packed into your question, but specifically a couple of areas. One, with regard to who's all on board. Obviously, this is a diverse and a large package, and it's not done. In other words, we're inviting more. I don't even know if I'm for 100% of it, which is why it's not a bill at this point. But it does represent some really good, both Republican and bipartisan efforts. I take as an example, 45Q. Expansion of the tax credit for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which people like, obviously, John Hoeven and I support, and other coal-producing states, as does Sheldon Whitehouse, support it, because the goal is emissions reduction. Ben Ray Lujan and I have legislation, to reclaim, cap and reclaim abandoned mine wells, or abandoned wells, oil and gas wells around the country. Ben Cardin and I have legislation to use the tax code to encourage more nuclear generation. I love John Barrassel's got this idea of how about we take the tax code and just make it neutral with regard to fuel and set some goals. There are a lot of really good ideas that are out there, that some of which are part of this plan. My hope actually is that after we do this and we start, people learn more about it and we invite more people in, we get past this, this craziness we're in right now that, I think maybe could come to an end fairly soon, considering that the American people are saying, we don't want these extremes. Let's get together. I actually think there is some opportunity to do some version of this. I also think it's really important. We haven't dug in real deeply on this yet, and I don't know the absolute solution to this. But when I talk about, for example, setting a 40% global goal, of reduction goal, Obviously, that's going to include a whole bunch of other countries. We have trading partners, and we have multilateral, and we have bilateral trade things in the works. We have continents, and we have polluters and adversaries. We have to, as a world, come together in some way. As you might recall, I'm one of the very rare Republicans during the last 4 years that thought we should have stayed in the Paris Accord. I thought it was an opportunity for the United States to bring its intellectual power to a global table and talk about real solutions. But we didn't, and it's an unfair set of standards, and so I understand why President Trump and others wanted out of Paris. But whether that's the forum, or whether it's bilateral trade deals, where we say to our trading partners, look, we're not going to accept a lower standard of manufacture. We're going to protect 100% of our supply chain, the integrity of it. And that means you're going to have to produce things at our level, with our standards, in order to do a trade deal with us. Now, that sounds harsh, that sounds simplistic, because it is, and we know it's not going to be that simple. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity here for a lot of people to come together, and we're just setting the table today for that further discussion.